So I personally have to be very mindful of what I'm talking about, how I'm talking about it. But given the events of the last week, certain names have been dropped inside certain things. We're now inside Tam's wheelhouse, and I have to have these conversations. I have to be part of this conversation. Because as a spiritual practitioner and as a mentor for other practitioners, I cannot ethically and professionally avoid the conversation. So I'm going to join in the conversation, being mindful about how I'm presenting this, and I'm going to be using yoga as my lens through which I'm going to be having the discussion about current events. So events of the last week have given us an invitation to reflect on things like authority, responsibility, and power within spiritual spaces. For those of us who work as practitioners or teachers and guides, moments like this are hugely important for us to pay attention to, because when public figures in spiritual or philosophical roles come under scrutiny, what is being revealed is not just personal failure. We have a pattern, and this pattern is not a new one. If we look back through just recent history, we see repeated examples of harm arising inside spiritual communities. Figures such as Bikram Chaudhry, Patabi Jas, the Dalai Lama have all, in different ways, been associated with very serious public concern around things like boundaries, misuse of power, misconduct. And more recently, new names have entered into the public conversation, reminding us that this isn't a closed chapter. This is an ongoing issue for us. I'm not here to speak about individuals. I think I'm done naming names to give you some good context of what it is exactly I'm talking about. Rather, I'm here to talk about structure. February for me is a month where I'm focusing on relationships. And where there are relationships, there are always going to be questions of ethics, responsibility, boundaries, and ego. In spiritual work, these questions are unavoidable because our work places us in positions of authority with our clients and the people that we work with. People come to us because they trust our perception. They open up themselves to our guidance. They allow us to name meaning for them, for who they are. That is power. Whether we want to claim it or not, whether we're like, oh, I'm imposter syndrome, it is power. And what current events highlight so clearly is what unchecked ego and unexamined authority can look like when they are allowed to grow inside spiritual spaces. As I say, for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to be using yoga and yogic philosophy as the primary teaching lens. And it's not because yoga is uniquely flawed, but because it offers such a great, clear, and honest framework for understanding just how spiritual practices shape the practitioner. So inside yogic philosophy, practice is not inherently moral. In fact, inside any spiritual practice, it's not inherently moral, it's directional. Yoga is often described as a life that is breathed, not a technique that is applied. And that breath is going to animate whatever it touches. The tradition gives us a way of understanding this through orientation rather than judgment. The yogi and what is symbolically described as raksasana are the two things that I'm going to be talking around. So let's look at the yogi. The yogi approaches practice as a form of purification. And I don't mean purity in a moral sense, but purification of intention. Right mind, right communication, right relationship to power. Yoga in this form of orientation refines perception. It softens grasping. It increases responsibility rather than importance. It asks the practitioner to look honestly at their motives, their attachments, and the impacts that they have. This aligns really closely with Buddhist principles of right intention, right speech, right action. And these are not ideals. These are daily disciplines. These are daily practices. The Raksasana orientation uses the same practices, but very differently. Here, yoga becomes a way to strengthen identity rather than dissolve attachment, to consolidate authority rather than cultivate restraint, to increase influence, access, and control without increasing accountability. The practices still work. Focus will deepen, presence will strengthen, language will sharpen, you'll feel empowered, you'll feel amazing, you'll get all the benefits. But what is not being cultivated is wisdom. What is being cultivated is ego. Yoga does not remove your ego by default. It amplifies whatever is left unchecked. Every spiritual practice does the same thing. And this is where confusion arises for a lot of people. There is this assumption that the depth of practice equals the depth of integrity, that spiritual discipline automatically produces ethical maturity. It doesn't. Spiritual practice is a magnifier. When intention is grounded in humility and responsibility, practice will deepen things like our clarity, care, ethical restraint. When intention is grounded in things like entitlement, unresolved desires, or unexamined power, practice amplifies those qualities instead. Nothing is hidden inside spiritual practice. It's only intensified. For practitioners, this distinction matters hugely for us. When someone sits across from us seeking guidance, we are not in a position of neutrality. We are holding relational authority. And authority without structure is going to drift. Not because someone suddenly becomes harmful, but because there are fewer interruptions. There's less challenge. There's more reverence. There's more silence. There's more pedestaling of the practitioner. In spiritual environments, this drift, it's often framed as devotion, as respect, as surrender. But surrender without discernment is not spiritual. It is wildly unsafe. The Raksasana is not someone without spiritual knowledge or discipline. In fact, they're highly practiced in it. It is the practitioner whose practice is not paired with restraint, someone who confuses insight with entitlement, presence with permission, influence with immunity. And this pattern appears wherever spiritual language is used to excuse behavior rather than examine it. Wherever questioning is discouraged, wherever harm is reframed as misunderstanding, here we have some very big problems. Yoga, meditation, philosophy, and study do not prevent misuse of power. Only ethical orientation does. Only accountability does. Only a willingness to be interrupted, to not stand on your pedestal and assert authority. So the question for practitioners is not how visible is your work or how respected are you. The very real question is a lot more quieter and a hell of a lot more demanding. What is my practice reinforcing? Is it reinforcing humility or is it reinforcing importance? Is it reinforcing responsibility or entitlement? Service to truth or protection of the self? Because yoga will breathe life into whatever it touches. Your spiritual practices and routines and rituals will breathe life into whatever they touch. And it will not stop us from becoming something we are unwilling to examine. And this is not about fear and making you being like, oh, this is scary. This is about maturity inside the work that you do. Spiritual practice does not make us safe for others. ethical responsibility does. And that is the work we must be willing to do as practitioners. We must, as spiritual practitioners, be checking our ego, our use of authority, and our use of power.